Let me transition to the last subject before I go to break, because it's something that's on my mind, and it just needs to be said. You know, following the 2013-2014 season, a season in which the Golden State Warriors went 51-31 and ended up losing in the first round to the Los Angeles Clippers, courtesy of a Game 7 loss to Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and those boys. Former NBA player and head coach Mark Jackson lost that job. Now, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, we're talking about a Mark Jackson who starred at St. John's University in Queens, New York. We're talking about a Mark Jackson that came into the NBA and ended up being the Rookie of the Year for the New York Knicks. We're talking about Mark Jackson, who is one of the brilliant basketball minds this game has ever seen. That same Mark Jackson was once the coach of the Golden State Warriors, no longer the case. That same Mark Jackson hasn't been able to get another job since that season as a head coach. That same Mark Jackson ultimately arrived at ESPN, where he worked for years doing color on the games, sometimes by himself with a Mike Breen or others calling games, and he would be there doing color by himself. I was going to say my boy Ryan Rucco as well, one of the great young broadcasters in the business. But Mark Jackson either doing it with them doing color by himself, or he was doing it with Jeff Van Gundy. And just recently, this past offseason, ESPN and ABC decided to go in a different direction when an inordinate amount of cuts took place and people were laid off. He was one of those casualties. Well, he's made news for another reason, because Mark Jackson was supposed to be calling games, that is, for the MSG networks, but it didn't happen. It was planned for Jackson to help fill in for Walt Clyde Frazier when he had nights off. And because that didn't transpire as people expected, there were numerous reports out that Mark Jackson had been fired. He had accepted the job. He was going to be calling games for the New York Knicks. And then all of a sudden, something must have happened. So Mark Jackson is not going to be calling games in place of Walt Clyde Frazier on the New York Knicks. Well, that's according to reports. That's according to reporters and news publications. I'd rather hear from Mark Jackson himself. And so should you.
Come on, man. Come on. At some point, the lies have got to stop. The lies have got to stop. I've sat back year after year after year, listening to lies, questioning me as a man and my integrity, for what I stand for, what I was raised on, has been questioned. I sat back and didn't say anything. My guy, the coach, the legend, Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, has a great quote that I listened to just recently. He said he lost the address to the high road. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting closer, because there's a side of me that's fed up, that's upset that you keep on smearing my name. Today a report came out that I was fired or dismissed from calling Knick games. Honored and privileged to have an offer bestowed upon me to back up the legend Walt Clyde Frazier calling Knick games. Over a week ago, I turned that job down. You heard what I said. More than a week ago, I turned the job down due to the fact that it wasn't the ideal conditions and it wasn't the ideal time for me.
You know, in the interest of full disclosure, because we have an obligation to be responsible at all times to the best of our ability, particularly when you've been in this business as long as I have. So the first order of business is to say that Mark Jackson is not only a former colleague, he's a friend. I've known him for many years. I wasn't blessed and fortunate enough to know him when I was growing up in Hollis, Queens, New York, and he was right down the block near Murdoch Avenue and O'Connell Park, where he grew up just a few blocks away. I looked up to him. I was never the player that he was. I was never the basketball mind that he was. And everybody has to find their own way. But one of the greatest honors of my career is that I've come to know him and to be able to call him a friend. So I will openly confess to you, to everybody out there, that, yeah, you can accuse me of a bit of bias. Fair enough. But what's happening to him and what has been happening to him is utter bullshit. And y'all are full of shit. And you know exactly who the hell I'm talking to when I say that. Every chance you get, you throw out rumors about him. And I'm not going to even denigrate or sully his name by bringing up what those rumors have been over the years. It spanned years. Nobody ever takes the time to say, well, if it were true, even if those rumors were true, oh, it was years ago. It was years ago. Now, I remember when he got fired from the Golden State Warriors. And there's not much shade we can throw on the Golden State Warriors because the successor was Steve Kerr, who happens to be one of the top 5 coaches in the history of basketball so far as I'm concerned. But you got people who despised Mark Jackson, who would tell you Klay Thompson and Steph Curry may have never been what they ultimately became had it not been for Mark Jackson and the tutelage he provided and how it set the stage for Steve Kerr to piggyback off of and ultimately elevate not just the franchise, not just them, but himself to astronomical heights as a coach and a basketball mind in the game of basketball. And no shade on Steve Kerr whatsoever for another reason. The man was a champion before he got to Golden State. He was a champion as a player in Chicago. He was a champion as a player in San Antonio. And if Tom Thibodeau had listened to him, if Mike D'Antoni had listened to him and allowed Tom Thibodeau to come to Phoenix and be the defensive coordinator when Steve Kerr was running basketball operations in Phoenix, Phoenix might have won the title one year with Amari Stoudemire and the Matrix, Sean Marion and Steve Nash and all of those brothers. They might have done it, but it didn't happen. I say all of that to say ain't no problem. Nobody's trying to throw any shade on Steve Kerr whatsoever. But there's something to be said about somebody teaching you how to crawl and walk before you ultimately learn to run and sprint. And that is what Mark Jackson did. For a lot of other people, it would have been enough to get another job. But for somehow, some way, for some reason, Mark Jackson gets ostracized. It really pisses me off. It really does. Because it's grotesquely unfair. This man, 98 and 66, his last 2 seasons coaching in Golden State, 2012 to 2014, and can't get another job all of these years? Really? But nobody wants to bring that up. Because every time he comes close, it could be Sacramento, it could be New York, it could be somewhere, there's always some damn rumor that's coming out. Did it ever occur to some of you people out there? What if people like myself and others who covered the NBA for the last quarter century started putting out the rumors that are out there about other people? Ladies and gentlemen, I know people who've been accused of some unsavory things that are working in professional basketball. I know somebody that was fired. I take that back. I know several people who were fired for having adulterous affairs. And somebody grabbed them and gives them life and ultimately elevate them. I know people that are working in professional sports right now that have been accused of some of the most egregious things that were unlawful, that harmed other human beings. And they've been on camera talking to y'all, and y'all have no idea about them, but we do. By we, I mean those of us who cover the league. I'm getting sick and damn tired. Every time Mark Jackson wants something or got something going on, when none of those accusations are applicable to him, and yet somehow, some way, they want to get in the way of this man trying to earn an honest living. Where's your compassion? Where's your decency? He don't have a right to go out there and earn a living? Now, let me be very, very clear. I'm talking about as a basketball coach. I worked for ESPN. I was not happy when Mark Jackson was let go. I don't have any control over that. I think he's an outstanding analyst, but I also know Doc Rivers is one too. And I know Doris Burke is a Hall of Famer. She's sensational. And I love the job that J.J. Redick and Richard Jefferson are doing. And their promise is endless. Their the prospects are endless. They are special. And I want to state for the record, I miss Jeff Van Gundy. There's certain things that are above my pay grade. And decisions are made in corporate America every day. I keep telling y'all about that. Where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside, where the money reside. Okay? Yes, I get it. But the point is that in the throes of business, evidently all of these years Mark Jackson was doing this job, he was good for business. You working for ESPN and ABC calling NBA final games, and all of a sudden you can't call Knicks games? Of course something's fishy. But why I got to be him? We are talking about James Dolan. That's his franchise. We are talking about Leon Rose, who's the president of the franchise. That's his franchise. We are talking about Tom Thibodeau, the coach, who every year feels like a hot seat to him. We are talking about that. Stephen A. Smith would not be saying anything if I looked around and I saw that this happens to everybody. Because fair is fair. But we know that ain't true. It's happening to him. Now, I know some of you saying, where he going with this? Oh, is he going to bring up race? No, because I don't have to. Like I said, it ain't happening to anybody else. Why it's happening to him? You literally got people trying to keep this man from being employed, lying on him at every turn, embellishing stories, or even if they're telling the truth about some things, stuff from years ago, like they can move on from their past, but he can't. Y'all are full of shit. And your day's gonna come. Because a lot of people may not know who you are, but I do. Remember that. Remember that.